But let me tell you about my first guest today. Used to writing the stories, not being the story, he is Sean O'Neill, the chief reporter of The Times, known for his agenda-setting scoops, which include the alleged sexual exploitation by Oxfam aid workers. But today he's come on Woman's Hour to talk about a story, a reality much closer to home. Because last October, he lost his 27-year-old daughter, Maeve, after she had suffered from ME since she was a teenager. He's now trying to raise the profile and understanding of the condition. You'll hear from Sean shortly. But before you do, I wanted to ask if you have also tried to use the loss of someone close to you in a positive way, to try and make a difference somehow. It could, of course, be telling their story, raising money, setting up a campaign, a foundation. Tell me what you've done with regards to whose life has changed yours and how. And what have you tried to say about them? Often people do not wish to be defined by the illnesses and the things in their life that have been so difficult that end up taking their life. But you tell their story, you take that on. What has ended up happening in your life as a result of the loss of someone close to you? 84844 is the number you need to text me here at Woman's Hour. I should say, as I always do, text will be charged at your standard message rate. Do check for those costs. On social media, we're at BBC Woman's Hour, or email me through the Woman's Hour website. But to Sean O'Neill, first of all, I should say, has joined me in the studio. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for joining me and our listeners today.
It's okay.
And I should say, for context as well at this point, you first broke your silence on this in terms of writing an article in light of the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, only 2 weeks ago, announcing a new plan to tackle ME and chronic fatigue syndrome in England, he says, with better care and support for people with the illness, more research, and a pledge to listen to those with lived experience of ME. That's a moment you described as the most bitter of bittersweet moments, I think you put it. Why?
Because I think we've been waiting for this. Families of people with ME have been waiting for something like this for such a long time. We wanted somebody senior in government to look at this illness, look at the way it's been treated and regarded, not just by the NHS, but by the medical profession more widely and by society more widely. There's I feel, a prejudice against ME and a sort of belief that it's a behavioural or psychological problem. And for the Secretary of State for Health to stand up and say, I think we need to reset the agenda on ME. We need research. We need to understand what ME is, and we need to listen to people who have ME rather than listening to the medical profession and the medical establishment. I think that's really, really a massive breakthrough moment. It makes Britain a world leader, a genuine world leader in looking at this disease. And
how it's considered and treated or not. I should say at this point also that there is an inquest into your daughter's death this summer, but she lived with this for a long time, didn't she?
She wasn't diagnosed until she was 18, so in 2012. But I think we knew, her family knew that, she knew there was something wrong before that. I remember picking her up from school one day. She was the only child by my first marriage, so I saw her for a long time every other weekend, for long weekends. And I picked her up from school one Friday at secondary school, and she'd been cross-country running. She'd fainted. She was struggling then with PE lessons throughout school. She struggled with fatigue, with just energy and sort of general debilitation, not feeling up to the pace, if you like. But she went on through school. She did really well at school. She was incredibly bright. I mean, really good at languages, insisted on doing Russian A-level, read Russian literature, tried to teach herself Irish because she was very proud of her Irish background. She was a remarkable young girl, really creative and intelligent, a beautiful singing voice. And slowly, like I say in the article, bit by bit, ME just stole that away from her over the years. It took her vibrancy, it took her youth, it took her independence, and it took all her promise, just took it all away. And her spirit was still there, but her body wasn't able to live up to her ambitions and her dreams and her wishes. And I think Maeve proves, in a way, people with ME are often described as malingerers, and they've got that horrible phrase, yuppie flu was invented in the 80s. And it was made out like they didn't want to do anything. They were lazy. They didn't care about life. Maeve loved life, and she wanted to be something in life. She wanted to make, she wanted to make the best of life. She even, when she was kind of housebound and bedbound, she managed to write a novel, the first draft of a novel. It's a really beautiful thing, and she kept it kind of hidden until she was too ill, and then I read it during her last weeks while just being near her, and it's a wonderful, quirky story, a crime drama set on Dartmoor where she grew up, and it's beautiful. But there are also passages in it that really reflect her grief. That there's a character who's lonely and who's lost her husband, and at times that character is speaking Maeve's voice to me about the loss of. She talks about the irretrievable loss of others, and the grief she lives not being able to live her fullest and best life, and it's deeply sad that we lost her, that the world lost her.
It sounds like she fought incredibly hard not to be defined by this.
She didn't want to be remembered as somebody who had ME. That wasn't the only thing she was there for. She had, like I say, so much promise.
I think one of the most striking things, and it's going to stay with me a long time, one of the, you are a writer for a living, you're a very good writer, but one of the lines in the piece that you wrote about this, you said, you've been living with cancer for 12 years, and that Maeve would have been better off in the NHS with cancer. What do you mean by that?
Because cancer is recognised and understood and massively researched, and if you turn up at hospital, I was lucky to be diagnosed very early with my cancer, with leukemia. You're in a system, there are protocols and pathways, and there are ways of treating things. Cancer is understood, and the boundaries of knowledge in cancer are continually being pushed. So my cancers are, I had chemo first time round. I might have had to have a bone marrow transplant. But my consultant told me the other day he hasn't done a bone marrow transplant for 10 years because the new drugs that are being produced by the new research are so good, and he already knows if my current drug fails what my next drug regime will be. So Maeve went into the health system and battled with a health system that didn't recognise her illness. There's no laboratory diagnostic test, there's no treatment, there's no real understanding, and there's a lot of apathy and ignorance and prejudice against people with ME because they are seen in a particular way. And she researched and researched. She was incredibly knowledgeable about her condition, but the patient can't cure herself. She doesn't have the resources. She can't develop the new technologies and new medicines that are required. So,
and it sounds like she was struggling to keep on top of it. Never mind think about how best to.
Well, it's very debilitating. It takes away a life. There are the figure used is 250,000 people in the UK with ME. That figure's been around for about 10 years. I suspect the number is much higher, and around 25% of people, and this is surveys around the world, are severely affected. That largely means housebound, or in the worst cases like Maeve's, eventually bedbound, because it's a relentless march of this disease. It doesn't. Some people have fluctuating conditions, but some people who get it severely, it just takes their whole lives away.
How old was she when she became bedbound?
She was the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay. So it was quite a long time.
It was housebound and increasingly spending more time in bed. She couldn't get up. I didn't live with her. She lived with her mum in Devon, and it became. I have to say, it fractures families as well, because for a long time, I was, it was incredibly frustrating to not be able to see somebody you love because they don't have the energy and the strength to sustain a visit. And that happens with lots of families. Since I wrote about Emmy, I've written a few things about it, but especially since I wrote about Maeve, a lot of people have been in touch who say, I have exactly the same experience. The patients themselves who say, I can't get out, I can't see my family, it's too exhausting, I struggle to eat. And it's not because they don't want to eat, it's because the body hasn't got the energy to digest the food. It's been overwhelming, the number of people who've come forward and said, I'm in the same position, this is terrible, sufferers and carers.
It's the time that we're also talking in. I'm very aware, especially I know we'll be getting messages as we're talking from people with experiences of either it themselves or those that they love and are close to. I'm very aware that we're talking in a time of long COVID and people trying to get people to the medical professionals to listen to them, to look after them. How much do you think that might have an impact on this?
I think long COVID is a game changer probably, but also something that maybe was avoidable. If we'd put the research into ME years ago, we might have the answer to long COVID already. But long COVID is producing in a lot of people very similar symptoms, huge overlap in symptoms. It's like most ME, it's post-viral. It seems to be autoimmune, that the body, even after mild COVID, can turn on itself and produce this long, debilitating reaction. And there are, around the world, billions of pounds going into research into long COVID. And a lot of the researchers, the more advanced researchers, the people who are open to new thinking, are saying, well, this could produce answers not just for ME, but for, not just for long COVID, but for ME and for other post-viral illnesses.
Sean O'Neill, stay with me. Let me bring in Dr. Charles Shepherd, who's a medical advisor to the ME Association and worked up, drawing up nice guidelines for ME for the medical profession, which were published last year. Dr. Charles Shepherd, good morning.
Morning, Emma.
What I haven't said yet is it's estimated that 2.4 times more women than men are affected by ME in England and Wales. That's according to the NICE figures, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. Do we know why?
We don't fully understand why, but there are a number of conditions that involve the immune system, hormones, genetic predisposition, in which we've got a female predominance. It's interesting that there's a similar sort of picture with multiple sclerosis here. We think that round about 3 to 1 is the female to male ratio of people with ME. And it may well be that it's this combination of genetic predisposition, the fact that people's immune system may respond differently, and female hormones. One of the interesting things about ME is that quite often people with ME women with ME improve during pregnancy. And again, that's something that happens with multiple sclerosis. So it's not unusual to have a disease that has a female predominance, and it's something that happens with other neurological and immune-based diseases like ME. Could I just say
yes,
that Sean has given a very moving picture, not only of what happened to Maeve, but also of the denial, the ignorance, and the neglect that is still happening for people with ME from certain sections of the medical profession. There are some very honourable exceptions, but this cannot go on. And I think we have now got some very clear indications, not only from this ministerial statement that came last week, but we've got a new NICE guideline, which has been very much welcomed by the patient community. And later this week, we've got an all-party parliamentary report coming out on all aspects of ME, which I hope is going to act as a further catalyst to really get something done to help people with this illness.
How quickly do you think there could be changes? Because I am very aware, we've got a message here from Paula, we've got a message from Beth, and they keep coming from women listening with ME at the moment who just about, getting out of bed in the instance I'm just reading here and managing to function a little bit and then getting back into bed and needing some of the basics to be put in place. How fast could we see change, do you think?
Well, I think hopefully with the minister getting involved and the desire to have a plan, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes at the moment with meetings at the Department of Health. We've got a NICE guideline which has sat there now for 6 months. We want to see services implemented, new services set up where people can be sent for hospital-based help with their diagnosis and their management. Many parts of the UK, particularly Scotland Northern Ireland and Wales have no such services at all.
Really?
And that really is something which has got to be done as a matter of urgency. And the other point about the new NICE guideline, which has abandoned this idea that this illness is a psychosomatic disorder, which has been put forward by psychiatrists for many years. So we no longer treating people with CBT and graded exercise. There is a whole new management plan there in this guideline, and we want to see that implemented. There's no reason why that shouldn't be going on now.
So are you confident, I mean, perhaps it's hard to say, especially if you've been waiting 6 months, but are you confident that with these guidelines, certainly in England, that no one will be questioned if it's in their head or not?
I'm not totally confident, because there's still a certain resistance, unfortunately, from the Royal Colleges, some people at the Royal Colleges, to what has gone into these guidelines. There is resistance.
Why? What is their resistance? Is it just what they've been told and they can't move their minds on to the reality?
There is a mindset amongst certain members of the medical profession that this is an illness which is all in the mind. When I was at medical school, and there are people of my generation who still hold these views, when I was at medical school back in the early 1970s, I was told this was all mass hysteria. It was hysterical nonsense. Go away, forget about it. So there is a lot of change. There is a lot of cultural change that needs to take place within the medical profession. And we need this policy change as well to get people diagnosed within the first 3 months of the onset of their symptoms.
Yes.
And then being given proper advice on their activity and energy management, good symptom control, and help with everything else that they need with social care, in particular for people at the severe end of the spectrum.
Dr. Charles Shepherd, thank you very much for your time and expertise this morning. A message from Kirsty says, thank you to Sean, who's still with me, I should say, for sharing his story eloquently and giving people with ME a voice. I have had relapsing, remitting ME for 26 years. I'm currently bedbound and housebound. The absence of any medical advances has made me lose hope of leading a normal life again. As Epherine's also messaged to say, Sean, I'm crying here listening to this conversation about ME. My 1987 diagnosis gave me something to hang on to, but I still struggle to manage my daily energy. I'm wary of the wariness. 35 years on, more than half of my life. With Maeve, and if I may ask this, and and I recognise how difficult this is, and I am so incredibly sorry. I should also say, I know I said this to you just off air before we came on. I'm so incredibly sorry for you and your family's loss. How did she face it towards the end, and was there anything that were you able to process this was happening?
It took me a long time to accept this was happening. How did she process it? She got fed up with hospital admissions. She had 3 really grueling hospital admissions last year. And as you said, there's going to be an inquest, and I think there are a lot of questions that will have to be answered there about how the hospital handled her case, right from her first admission, right through to the issue of where her mum and I had to fight to get proper palliative care for her because someone somewhere in the system didn't believe in her illness.
So that was happening to her?
That was happening to her. She faced it with incredible bravery, some dark humour, some real anger, but with phenomenal courage. It was, like you said, it's hard to believe, hard to accept. But in the end, she said, I don't want to go back to hospital. I want to die at home, surrounded by people who love me. It was just, it still is utterly heartbreaking.
Of course. Thank you for coming to talk about her today.
Thank you.
I think it's, I don't know what she'd make of her dad on the radio. What do you think?
She might hate me for talking about it, for not writing about it earlier in my career. She might be angry with me. She was good at being angry. She was a lovely girl, an amazing young woman.
Yeah.
I'm just so sorry she can't be here.
Well, you have also painted a wonderful picture of her and her hopes and the writing and everything else, because I know how important that is to give a fuller picture of Maeve as well. But Sean, thank you so much for coming
Thanks,
on.
Emma. Thank you.
Sean O'Neill, talking and remembering Maeve, his daughter, and many of you, I have to say, getting in touch this morning about your own experiences and also perhaps what a loss in your family has meant in terms of what you've then done. I mean, Margaret here has emailed to say, I had ME for 8 years. I was bedbound for some of that time. Some complementary medicine brought me out of it. My GP was very sympathetic but couldn't help me. It's very positive but also very frustrating. It's taken long COVID to bring post-viral illness and therefore ME to people's attention. Another one, I developed chronic fatigue syndrome in 2014, aged 56. I thought my life wasn't going to be worth living. I can imagine a young person would find it hard to see a future. This is a heartbreaking story. This is a message that's come in on Twitter, but thank you for sharing it. And so they keep coming. And another one, just to say, from Pam. Mid-October 1982, I was a full-time teacher, sole parent of 2. I got out of bed to get my children up for school and then fell flat on my face. That was the beginning of my ME journey, which still continues, including heart failure. My goodness. And Beth also has said so much we could say about ME, and at last there's a tiny ray of hope that some medical help or support may become available, in particular that staff may be trained to understand this complex chronic illness rather than being misinformed. It's such a misunderstood condition. More often than not, people think it's about being tired all of the time, which is just the tip of the iceberg. Beth, thank you so much for taking the energy to write this message. Who's had it, Beth here says, for approximately 35 years.